Hello, gentle self-care for the overlooked child. Have you ever noticed when you begin to understand your childhood patterns, something inside you starts to shift? Sometimes we move through life for many years simply doing what we need to do. We cope, we adapt, we get on with things. And then one day we begin to reflect more deeply on our lives. We begin to see things that we didn't fully understand before. And when that happens, something very interesting can occur. The overlooked child inside us sometimes begins to surface, not in a dramatic way, but quietly, gently, almost like a small voice inside saying, "I see it now." Understanding the overlooked child. The overlooked child is often the part of us that learnt to be strong very early in life. It may have been the child who noticed the emotional atmosphere in the home, the child who adapted, the child who tried to keep things calm, or simply the child who learnt to manage life quietly without drawing too much attention. Many people carry the part of themselves into adulthood without even realising it. Because when we are young, we simply do what we need to do in order to cope. Children are incredibly adaptive. They learn very quickly how the world around them works. And often they develop ways of surviving emotionally that help them move forward in life. But these patterns can remain inside the nervous system for many years. When identity work begins, later in life when we begin reflecting more deeply on who we are, something changes. We start recognising patterns. We might begin to understand how certain experience shaped us, how certain behaviours developed, how certain ways of coping became part of who we are. This process is sometimes called identity work. It's a process of beginning to understand ourselves more clearly. But when we do this work, it can sometimes stir things inside the nervous system, not because anything is wrong, but because the body is recognising something it has carried for a long time. The nervous system remembers, even when the mind wasn't consciously thinking about it. Why the nervous system needs grounding. When we begin to understand our past more clearly, the nervous system sometimes needs a little time to settle. It's a bit like opening a door to a room that hasn't been looked at for a while. There can be a moment of adjustment, a moment where we simply pause. And that is where gentle self-care becomes very important. Because healing is not only about discovering the pattern, it is also about learning how to soothe the part of ourselves that carry the experience. Gentle self-care. Gentle self-care for the overlooked child is not complicated. It's not dramatic. In fact, it is often very simple. It might be taking time to sit quietly for a while, breathing slowly, allowing the body to relax. It might be spending time in nature, or sitting with a cup of tea, or simply reminding yourself that you are now safe. Sometimes gentle self-care means speaking kindly to yourself, almost the way you would speak to a child who had been through something difficult. You might say quietly to yourself, "It's okay. I understand now. You did the best you could." And that kind of kindness can be very powerful for the nervous system, because many overlooked children learnt to be strong, but they didn't always receive the gentleness they needed at the time. The adult self appears. One of the most beautiful things that happen during healing is that the adult self begins to take a more supportive role. Instead of the child carrying everything alone, the adult self begins to say, "I see what happened, and I'm here now." That shift can be incredibly grounding, because the nervous system realizes that the situation is different now. The child who once had to cope quietly is no longer alone. There is an adult present now, a compassionate and awareness, a willingness to understand. Healing happens slowly. Healing really happens in a dramatic moment. More often it happens slowly, through awareness, through compassion, through patience. Each time we recognise a pattern with kindness instead of judgment, sometimes inside us begins to soften. The nervous system that doesn't have to remain in survival mode forever. It can begin to relax. It can begin to feel safe, and sometimes the most powerful step in healing is simply allowing ourselves to be gentle. A gentle closing reflection. When we begin to understand the overlooked child within us, something very important begins to happen. We begin to offer ourselves the care and the understanding that may not have been fully available when we were young. And that gentle care can become a very powerful part of healing, because the overlooked child doesn't need to be pushed or forced. It simply needs to be seen. And sometimes that simple act of seeing is exactly what the nervous system has been waiting for. Perhaps the overlooked child has been walking beside us all along, quietly waiting to be understood. And when we turn inward, that child with gentleness rather than judgment, something remarkable happens. The struggle begins to soften, and the nervous system remembers what it feels like to rest. And that is when we become one. Thank you for sitting with me and sharing this time. Be gentle, be kind, and remember you matter. Bye for now. Thanks for watching.